Hi, everyone. As someone probably just said, I am Tom Hawkins, and I'm very sorry that I can't be with you today. I'm particularly sorry not to have the opportunity to spend time with and interact with my co-panelists. And so, Rosa, Justine, and Danelle, thank you very much for the chance to participate, at least remotely, in this way. And I miss you, and I'm sorry that I can't be there with you. Today I'll be talking about some connections between two Haitian texts and the Homeric Odyssey. And this is part of a larger project that I'm working on currently about Haitian literature and connections with ancient Greece and Rome. So without further ado, here's Haitian Odysseys. Homer's Odyssey may not be the original tale of nautical adventure, but its canonical standing has fostered an influence that permeates reams of subsequent literature. Like the watery substrate that frames Odysseus's adventures, his storyline has seeped into every crack and crevice of our collective library that touches upon treacherous voyages, literal or metaphorical. Today I will pair two such texts, one that explicitly replays the Odyssey and another that does not. Mon Odyssée by Jean-Paul Pillet and Children of the Sea by Edwige Danticat cohere because both were written by authors born in the Caribbean nation of Haiti, though Pillet would have called it the French colony of Saint-Domingue. Though vastly different in tone and worldview, these two texts engage a similar network of Odyssean themes that, I contend, help us both to understand each story more deeply and, in turn, to read Homer's tale in new and different ways. I will focus my comments here largely around the themes of having a home and the naming of names. Pillet's Mon Odyssée is a rather strange epistolary epic written in a mixture of prose and poetry and divided into 8 books, each with a different dedicatee and composed at various times between 1793 and 1806. The author, Jean-Paul Pillet, describes himself as a Creole, which in this case indicates a white French citizen who was born in the colony of Saint-Domingue. This amazingly lucrative French holding would be the site of an equally amazing slave uprising that began in 1793 and culminated in the establishment of Haiti as an independent nation in 1804. The very basic flow of the epic follows the 18-year-old Pillet from France, where his royalist loyalties forced him to flee the French Revolution, to his family's plantation in Saint-Domingue, just as the Haitian Revolution is beginning, and finally to the United States. The Odyssey of Pillet's title follows Homer's tale of adventure in very broad stroke, though not in many particular details. Yet even so, I believe it is profitable for us to consider certain thematic parallels, particularly the idea of having a homeland. In contrast to Odysseus, Pillet could not hope for, let alone attain, the sort of homecoming or nostos that drove the Greek hero across the Mediterranean. The sack of Troy was a glorious triumph undermined by the toxic excesses of the victors, and from the ruins of this great city Odysseus meandered from adventure to adventure until finally returning to Ithaca, where he needed to set things straight with the suitors and reconnect with his son and wife. Ithaca and Troy, that is, represent opposing poles of Odysseus's world, home and the opposite of home. But for Pillet, the concept of home could not be so simple. As a product of the Columbian Exchange, he saw himself as thoroughly French, though his birthplace and his estate that sustained his finances lay across the Atlantic from that European polity. Yet although Saint-Domingue may have been French, this did not mean that it was France. And so Pillet's sense of home split between the kingdom he loved and in which he lived, and the colony he preferred to avoid despite his umbilical connection to it. The colonial world, even for a member of the wealth elite, could confound the sense of home around which Homer's epic coheres. Since Pillet's title challenges readers to connect his emotional geography to that of Odysseus, let's play with the role of France. Like many colonials, Pillet came to France at a very young age for the purposes of education. His use of a Homeric title, therefore, represents a kind of homage to the kingdom in which his training in topics such as Greek literature was honed. And in certain vignettes, he casts himself as a thoroughgoing French insider. In Bordeaux, for example, he notices some young men eyeing him suspiciously, and he suspects that things might end in fisticuffs. As it turns out, the youths were scrutinizing the cut of Pilet's Parisian clothes, and he ends up taking the time to update the locals on the latest fashion trends from Paris. Even amid a revolutionary upheaval, he finds plenty of time, that is, to perform his status. Thus, Parisian culture represents Pilet's omphalos, the center of the world in terms of everything from the educational canon to the more quickly shifting strictures of sartorial taste. But as the French Revolution threatens all that, the space that has been the Ithaca of his formative years transforms into something more like Homer's Troy. Paris, like Troy, is the starting point for our hero's journey, where a great kingdom has just fallen. The parallel destruction of monarchies overlays the Homeric plot, but the discrepancy about the main character's relationship to that monarchy allows new ways of thinking about the narrative of the homeward journey. Although France does not represent the opposite of home for Pilet, as Troy did for Odysseus, a colonial world necessarily navigates a bipolar geography of home. As Pilet arrives to his holdings in Saint-Domingue, we might expect that he has reached his Ithaca, the place where he was born and spent his early childhood. Yet the first line of text after a mock Homeric prologue suggests that Pilet does not feel Saint-Domingue to be his home at all, as he distances himself from that space. Although he later describes the island in more positive terms, he clearly would have preferred to remain in France, the France of Louis XVI that no longer existed. As he arrives to his estate, Pilet receives a loving welcome from the slaves on his plantation who were, quote, fat, well cared for, and happy, end quote. The orchestrated pomp and colonial stratification feel strained in their theatricality, and Pilet may have intended to foster such a brittle veneer, since the Haitian Revolution erupts on the day after his arrival. This is important not just because this second revolution of Pilet's young life will drive the next stage of his adventures, but also because it permits another possible overlay of Homeric geography. Inasmuch as Pilet is at home in Saint-Domingue, he ought to play the part of a Trojan. His political order is threatened by a militant power surrounding his space of power and privilege. And indeed, like the Homeric Trojans, Pilet's side will lose, and that other power, namely the insurgency that will soon take the name Haiti, will win. But this model only goes so far. Pilet has already introduced himself as a new Odysseus, and in a richly described moment of one-on-one combat, he presents himself as Achilles, facing off against a new Hector. Pilet gets to have it both ways. Because he is relying on Homer only in quite flexible ways, and because his own emotional geography is bifurcated, he can be both the Greek hero and the defeated royalist, the local whose home is being attacked, and the adventurer looking to return to some other place. In Pilet's world, the dynamics of colonialism mean that he does not have a singular homeland like the Homeric Ithaca. And we can flip that around to see that Saint-Domingue itself is an inherently problematic homeland for everyone. No native Taino people play a role in his narrative, which is apt enough since that population had been all but eliminated by European contact. Without those who might truly call this space home, we are left with a combination of European imports, who, for all their frippery and elitism, don't want to be there, and African imports who suffer the worst forms of oppression and, to say the least, don't want to be there either. Saint-Domingue, that is not really a home for anyone at this point. Now, Any totalizing notion of home is obviously a cathexis of emotional energy overlaid onto socio-geographical stability. And the last thing I want to do is make Pillet, a royalist, elitist, slave owner, colonizer, into an overly sympathetic figure. I do, however, want to note that the colonial system created certain challenges even for those at the top, like Pillet. As he fled Saint-Domingue for refuge in the United States, I suspect that the Homeric power of his title was intended, at least in part, to highlight the contrast between Odysseus's fixed notion of home and the fluidity of the colonial Atlantic world, in which a French citizen, who would have happily remained in France, has to return to his birthplace only to find an improvised kind of home in the new land of the United States. Perhaps Pillet could have called his story a new Aeneid, and that would have handled the notion of home in a very different way. But by giving us a Homeric title, he seems to foreground the idea that for him, and all the more so for the enormous number of enslaved Africans for whom he has no sympathy, the colonial world does not include an Ithaca to which he can return. I'm going to shift now to my second text, and having spent enough time on this screen in this format, I'm going to have my words overlaid over some images of a contemporary Haitian artist whose portraits of particularly voodoo spirits moving from Haiti to the United States by boat forms a nice thematic backdrop to my verbal arguments. So I will hit pause on this and continue on the next slide. My second text is Edwige Dantica's short story Children of the Sea from her 1996 collection Crick Crack. Like Pillet's much longer work, Dantica's narrative consists of a series of letters, but whereas Pillet exerts a strong autobiographical voice throughout his long prosametric letters, Dantica presents 10 pairs of brief, alternating perspectives of two young lovers separated by the political chaos following the 1991 uprising that ousted Haitian President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who would return in 1994 to resume his presidency. The male who speaks first is a politically active university student who, again like Pillet, had to flee because of violent political chaos. He writes his letters in a journal while on a boat heading toward Miami with a group of other refugees. The female counterpart, who speaks second and thereby gets to conclude Dantica's story, is a young woman who stays in Haiti with her parents and who witnesses firsthand the brutality of the insurgent regime. Each embedded author pens 10 letters, but none is ever sent. The male character has to throw his journal overboard in a last-ditch effort to reduce weight as the ship sinks, and the female character never has a place to which she can send her missives. In the final exchange, he narrates his last moments, recognizing that he is about to die, and she tells of a swarm of black butterflies, harbingers of bad news in Haitian lore, that surround her and force her to realize that her lover has died. As in Pillet's Homeric title, Dantica's story plays with notions of home in a post-colonial vein, but whereas Pillet does so from an elitist perspective in which his own freedom to move and his access to the basic necessities of life are never in doubt, Dantica's characters suffer extreme depravities. The male character leaves his Haitian home in hopes of creating a new and better situation for himself in the United States, but the dangerous journey and the overburdened boat in which he travels are doomed. Odysseus and Pillet are masters of their own vessels, but Dantica's sailor, like his fellow refugees, has merely bought a spot on the boat, and her female character stays in a homeland that is falling apart. Homer tells us that the people of Ithaca had not met in an assembly since Odysseus had left for Troy, and I'm always amazed at the apparent stability of the Ithacan system that has maintained some sense of order after nearly 20 years without a leader. Of course, Odysseus's familial situation needs to be sorted out, but we find no hint of problems like those described in Children of the Sea. And this brings me to the issue of names. Odysseus's name is built into the title of his epic, and the dramatic revelation of his name at the beginning of Book 9 is loaded with narrative tension and import. Pillet never uses his own name, but his conceit of composing autobiographical letters suggests that his addressees would naturally and obviously connect his name and person with his adventures. But Dantica foregrounds a different kind of interest in names. The male writer opens his first note with the musing, quote, "I know there are lots of people in this world whose names don't matter to anyone but themselves," end quote. Neither main character is named, nor is the recently ousted Haitian president. Dantica presents only a few named characters, and they are what we might call supporting actors, whose stories do not drive the plot except inasmuch as the abuses they have suffered testify to the pervasive violence of this narrative world. The female letter writer tells the story of her neighbor, Madame Roger, the mother of a young political dissident who has been killed in jail by the authorities. When Madame Roger goes to retrieve her son's body, she is given only his head, which she carries around town bemoaning what has been done to her son. Perhaps in punishment for this display, militants break into her home and beat her to death, while the neighbors hide in a latrine and listen in silent horror. The male letter writer shares the boat with a girl named Céliane. Militants broke into her home, too, and forced her brother to have sex with her mother, after which they gang-raped Céliane herself. She becomes pregnant, and in shame she disfigures her face with a razor blade. By the time she leaves Haiti, she is nearly ready to give birth and does so on the boat. The baby, we are initially told, is strikingly beautiful and quiet, and it takes some time to realize that the child was stillborn. As the boat takes on ever more water, the other passengers encourage her to throw her baby's body into the sea to save weight. Eventually she does so, and she steps over the edge herself to join her dead infant. Madame Roger and Céliane merit commemoration not because of their prominent roles in the story of Haitian history, but rather because of their traumas which frame the exchange of letters between the two main characters. The Odyssean reverberations in this story bring out a gendered violence that is absent, or perhaps merely unspoken, in the ancient epic. As we look at these issues of who gets to have a home and a name, I'd like to conclude by turning again toward the geographical spaces that frame the stories I've been discussing. Again, Odysseus has a home and an anti-home at Ithaca and Troy, and his adventures play out between the two. Pillet has a cultural home in France, which he adores so long as the monarchy reigns, a birth home in Saint-Domingue, from which he derives his wealth until the Haitian Revolution forces him out, and ultimately he finds a new home in the U.S., a place of stability where he is welcomed easily enough. The characters in Dantica's story, however, have very little claim to anything like a home. Their nameless ancestors were forcibly taken from Africa. Their national home in Haiti has unraveled completely, and the shores of the U.S. prove to be a too distant goal. What does that leave? The answer is in Dantica's title, The Children of the Sea. When the situation in Haiti is untenable, Dantica's characters have only the space between, the space of the Middle Passage, which has been rebooted as the space between Haiti and Miami. Before things get really bad, the male letter writer says that under the heat of the unremitting sun, he is, quote, finally an African, and that it feels as though they, quote, are sailing for Africa to live with the spirits, end quote. Paul Gilroy, in his 1993 book, The Black Atlantic, situates the historical context of black culture in maritime routes, recasting the trajectories of displaced peoples into the central hub of the diaspora. This idea resonates with particular poignancy in the case of Haiti. The self-proclaimed first black republic feels in some ways like a bit of Africa that has floated away from that continent. But its recent appeal for membership in the African Union was ultimately rejected on geographical grounds. A return to Africa, Lan Guinea in Creole, was a spiritual, if not physical, goal for the enslaved Africans of the colonial era. And today, the Haitian diaspora is navigated through the concept of l'autre bout de l'eau, the other side of the water. Odysseus and Pele understand the adventure and challenge of seeking what lurks on the other side of the water, but Dantica's characters, perhaps like the nameless members of Odysseus's crew, highlight the fragility of being caught between. Dantica does not heroize her letter writers, and accordingly, their unnamed names are of no consequence to anyone but themselves. But Céliane, together with her dead baby, demands to be named. She ultimately finds a home only in the depths of the sea, the resting place of so many who died along the Middle Passage, that waterway that once led boat people from Africa to the Caribbean, and now follows a similarly desperate passage from Haiti to Miami. Thank you again for your time and your patience. If you feel compelled to share any feedback on my presentation, please feel free to contact me at the address below. And Rosa, Justine, and Danelle, thank you again for your help in having me participate in this way. I hope it wasn't too awkward in terms of the logistics of the presentation. Thanks, and bye-bye.